I'm going to show you exactly how I went from throwing 78 miles an hour to 95 miles an hour in 2 years, step by step. In 2017, I was a 16-year-old throwing 78 miles an hour. Fast forward 2 years, I'm throwing 95 miles an hour pretty consistently. And there were 5 main drivers for gaining velocity. Number 1 is raise the benchmark, gain 30 pounds of muscle, 2 high intensity throwing sessions a week, lifting with a purpose, and taking time off from playing. And we'll get right into all of these. So the first thing is to raise the benchmark. And this might actually sound obvious, but if you want to train to throw and want to throw 95 miles an hour, then that actually has to become your benchmark. Because if you're watching this, then chances are the players around you don't throw very hard. And so this was true for me as a kid who grew up in Sydney, Australia, where if you're throwing 84 miles an hour, then that'll be considered gas. And so a lot of the kids would be like, I want to be the best player on my team. And so I'm going to train to throw 85 miles an hour because that will make me the hardest thrower on the team. But the problem that creates is that 85 miles an hour doesn't get you any scholarships or professional opportunities. It just makes you the best player on the team. And so what happens is when kids get to this 85 mile an hour mark, they start to get complacent and they're like, I'm the best player on my team now. I don't have to train as hard. This is something that I noticed at a young age. And so I looked at myself and I looked at my goals and I was like, I'm a 16-year-old, I'm throwing 78. Where do I want to get to in the next 2 to 3 years? What do I want to do with my baseball career? And the answer was I wanted to go to a Division I school, get a really good degree, or go professional. And so I kind of broke it down. Who are the guys who are actually getting these opportunities, going to these powerhouse D1s, going and getting drafted in and getting a decent amount of money? And when I was doing some research, I found this thing called the All-American Perfect Game. And this game absolutely changed my mindset. I was watching it and every single pitcher that was coming out was just pumping 93 plus. I knew that had to be the new benchmark, 93 plus. So I thought to myself, if I can get to 94 miles an hour, then I'll probably be able to go to these powerhouse universities or get professional interest. And so that was kind of my mindset there. So I know everyone says it like, yeah, I want to get to the Division I level. I want to go pro. But something to really ask yourself is, are you training to get there? Are you satisfied with where you are being one of the better players on your team? Or are you comparing yourself against the elite? Because that's what's really going to take you to the next level is comparing yourself to the elite. Because if you compare yourself to the people around you, chances are you're probably one of the best players on the team already. And so your mindset needs to be, okay, I'm still not good enough. Compared to all of these elite guys, I'm one of the worst. And so I need to try as hard as I can to be as good as them or even better than them. So that's step number 1. Compare yourself to guys who are way better than you, because that's going to motivate you to work that much harder to get to their level. So step number 2 is to gain 30 pounds of muscle. When I was a 16-year-old, I was a skinny kid weighing 155 pounds. And so I need to gain weight and muscle. There are 2 reasons for this. So a bigger muscle is a stronger and more powerful muscle. And number 2 is that lean body mass is directly correlated to pitching velocity. So if you think about throwing a baseball hard, it's basically just putting more force behind the baseball. And so a bigger muscle is able to produce more force, and so it'll help you throw harder. Also, time and time again, studies have shown that the higher level athletes have more lean body mass than the others. And so there's a direct correlation there. You might have heard the saying mass equals gas, and that is pretty true if it is muscle. And so you can't just be gaining a bunch of fat and then thinking that you're going to throw gas. A little bit is fine. Obviously, if you're a skinny kid, you shouldn't be worrying about if you're going to gain fat or anything like that. But for the most part, you want to keep it pretty lean because that's what's going to correlate to the pitching velocity. And so as far as how I gained this weight and muscle, I was what you'd call a hard gainer. And so the mindset was kind of like, I have such a high metabolism, I just can't gain weight, I'm eating everything that I can. And what I realized was I was dead wrong. Because gaining weight is math. You just have to consume more than you burn. And so all you need to do is make sure that you're eating more than you burn. And this is what's called a caloric surplus. And so when you're in this state where you have more calories that you're consuming than you're burning, you gain weight. For example, if you're eating 3,000 calories a day, but you only burn 2,500 calories, then you're going to automatically gain weight because of that caloric surplus. There are more calories inside of you than you're burning. So this might be oversimplified, but it's honestly all you need to know. If you're not gaining weight, then you're not eating enough. And I know you probably cringe when I just said that because you're probably like, oh my God, I'm eating as much as I can. And I get it. I was exactly in your shoes. I'm going to tell you a pretty easy way to get calories in soon. But first, the biggest reason, in my opinion, why people struggle with gaining weight is that they get overwhelmed. You get overwhelmed by the macros, the micros, the optimal diets, the fancy whatever thing that people give you. But the truth is, if you're 150 pounds, 155 pounds, then you don't have to worry about any of that. All you really need to worry about is to get a bunch of calories and protein in. So my weight gain tip number 1 is to have a ultimate mass gainer shake in the morning. And so this is a name that I created, and my protein shakes were pretty insane. So this is how I made my shake. Step number 1 was to add as much milk as a shake maker would take. Step number 2 was to add double the recommended amount of protein powder inside of it. Was it smart? Maybe not, but I needed the calories and the protein. Step number 3 was I Googled what is the most calorically dense foods for a protein shake. I ended up with a bunch of ingredients and I just threw them all into the shake. And so some of these included honey, yogurt, olive oil, raw eggs, ice cream, coconut oil, peanut butter. Honestly, anything that added calories, I just added. This shake had well over 1,000 calories. And so I would chug this before school. And for the first 30 minutes, I thought I was going to throw up every single day. But it set me up for the day because I already had 1,000 calories in the morning. And all I had to do was get another 3,000 calories in for the day. Weight gain tip number 2 is to eat a bunch of peanut butter sandwiches. So when I was in high school, I made my own lunches. And so I needed something that was really easy to make, really quick to make, that added a bunch of calories and had protein. So the peanut butter sandwich was perfect for this. It would take me a couple minutes to make, and each of these would have 400 to 500 calories each. So I'll make 5 to 6 of these peanut butter sandwiches and I'll bring them all to school and I'll eat them throughout the day. And so for me, that was a way to get another 2,000 to 3,000 calories in a day. But for you, it might not be a peanut butter sandwich. If you don't like peanut butter sandwiches, then it could be something easy to make that is very consistent, that adds 400 to 500 calories every time you eat it. And so it can be anything really, depending on what you like, but make sure it has protein, make sure it has enough calories in it, and make sure it's very easy to make and consistent, because if it's something that's difficult to make, then it's not going to be very consistent. You're going to feel like it's a chore to make and stuff like that. And so it should be very easy to make and something that you like. Adds 400 to 500 calories to your day and adds protein as well. So after all of that, that should get you to about 3,000 calories on the day. You had the protein shake and you had 4 to 5 of those peanut butter sandwich or whatever thing you like that adds 2,000 calories on the day. And the last thing I would do is just load up my plate at dinner. And so my mom would make anything it would usually be some type of carb and meat and veggies, because she made me eat veggies. This is where you get your nutrients in. You're probably thinking, damn, this is one of the most unhealthy diets I've ever heard of. Yes, but you just gotta do what you gotta do sometimes to gain that weight, especially if you're a hard gainer. And so dinner, load up your plate with veggies, carbs, meat, whatever your mom cooks, and try to get some nutrients in. And this should complete your day at about 4,000 calories. And that should be enough for most people to gain weight. But if it isn't, then you can just add one of these things. So you can add a protein shake, or you can add a couple peanut butter sandwiches, or you can just add a big meal, something like that. And so weight gain is a grind. Eating is a grind. I hated it, but it was something where I had to do. And the mindset was, this is something that is necessary for me to throw hard. And so I have to do it. And the good news is you do this for 1 to 2 years and it can set you up for your whole life. When I was 16, as I said, I was 155, but then 2 years later, I'm in the 200s. So I gained like 50 pounds within those 2 years. And now I'm never gonna have to force feed myself or anything like that. I'm at a pretty good weight. I'm at a pretty steady weight. And so you do this for 1 to 2 years and it can set you up for your whole baseball career and your life. So let's move on to step number 3, which is 2 high intensity throwing sessions a week. And so basically your throwing program. So during these 2 years, I followed mostly what the Driveline throwing program is, which is a combination of plyo velos, pull downs, and long toss. So if you've never tried this type of throwing program before, I would definitely start with the long toss and on-ramping with long toss. I had a really good conversation with Alan Jaeger about this and how he would on-ramp for these type of velocity training throwing programs. And so how I would do it is I would say for about a month or 2, just strictly long toss 3 to 4 times a week. And how I would do it is the Jaeger long toss program, which is you lob it, put some air behind it as you go out, as you go out, as you go out. There's air behind it. It's very nice, relaxed, loose until you get to a max distance. So you're still putting a lot of air behind it, but it's like max effort. You have to throw it as hard as you can to get it on the full to your catch partner. And when you get there, I would maintain that effort that you threw to get to that catch partner, but take it down and throw it on a line. So it doesn't matter if you bounce this or not, but this is basically prepping you for pull downs. And so you are shuffling, throwing max effort on a line. I'll do that like 5 to 10 throws and probably do this 3 times a week, something like that. I wouldn't go too overboard with it. But this is just prepping your arm to throw at a max effort for the plyo velos and the pull downs. For the first 3 weeks, I actually wouldn't do the pull downs on a line. I would just stretch it out, stretch it out, stretch it out to really prep your arm. And then the next month, the next 3 to 4 weeks, I would start incorporating the pull downs, 5 to 10 of them, nothing crazy, to get your arm ready. So the next thing would be plyo balls, and this is an essential in my mind for any type of velocity training program. The reason why plyo balls are so important is because they start to develop high velocity movement patterns without you actually consciously thinking on them. So for example, my plyo ball routine during those 2 years went something like this. I would do a pivot pickoff, and then I would do a roll-in throw, and then a rocker throw, maybe like a step behind, and then a walking wind-up throw. And so all of these drills are actually working on some type of mechanical component. For example, with the roll-ins, I really like the roll-ins because how you do the roll-in is you face your target right here, you step with your foot facing the target, and then you turn and then throw. And this is something that taught me separation. And so your hip and your feet are facing the target, but then you turn to really feel the hip to shoulder separation before you throw. And so again, like walking wind up, this is a drill that I really struggled with, but it teaches you the drift. And so you're walking and then you lift your leg and then go. And so these drills are teaching you subconsciously the high velocity movement patterns that you're gonna need to throw hard. And so in my mind, this is something that is crucial. You can always do mechanics and consciously try to fix your mechanics and stuff like that. But having drills to do with these plyo balls is really invaluable to just get daily reps in and daily just putting yourself into these high velocity movement patterns. And so for most of this, I would stay off the mound. And this might be a hot take, but this is something that I did. And it taught me how to generate linear force without using the mound. And so right now, a lot of people are using the mound for plyos, and they're saying is like, we pitch on the mound, so get on the mound more often. And that's something that I do agree with as well. But if you're someone who throws under 90 miles an hour, then I would just stay off the mound and just work off the flat ground, because it's going to be so valuable to learn how to generate that linear force without the slope. And so when you have the slope, you can kind of cheat it a little bit. You can just fall, and then that's going to create the linear momentum. But when I was on the flat ground, there is no slope, and so I had to create the linear momentum myself. And that's kind of really what developed an elite back leg for me. I had a really good back leg, and we'll go into all of these facilities. They'll put me into biomechanic labs and stuff like that. And they told me my lower body looks fantastic. And I think doing this is what actually developed that. And so I would stay off the flat ground. Benefit to it is once you're off the flat ground for a long period of time, a month or even longer, and then you get on the mound, it just feels like you have jetpacks on, and it just feels like linear momentum is on a different level. And so that's kind of what I would recommend there. So for my first velocity throwing day, it was actually a plyo velo day. And so I know we talked a little bit about the plyos and how I used to use them. With the plyo velo day, it's basically just going through these movements and throwing the max effort and tracking the velocity of each throw. And so the movements that I described, pivot pickoff, roll in, rocker, step behind, walking windup, pitching delivery, you would go through all of those drills and throw each plyo ball. So at the time it was blue, red, yellow, and gray if you're using driveline plyo balls. And you would throw 2 to 3 of them each as hard as you can. And then you would track the velocity of each throw. And so what kind of happens is you get a spreadsheet with all the velocities for each of the movements. And then that becomes a baseline. And every single week when you do it, you try to beat your previous velocity record for that ball and that movement. And so that's kind of how you track your progress, is do it every week, try to beat your previous week. And once you do that for 3 to 4 weeks, then you can deload. But if you're just starting out and you've never done plyo velo stuff before, I would really recommend sticking with 4 to 5 movements that you like and just try to progress those. And I probably would recommend the roll-in throw, the rocker throw, step behind, a turn and burn. I don't actually know what the name is, but it's when you face the target with your back facing the target, turn and throw. It's kind of like a pickoff. And then probably just like a pitching delivery. And so I would stick to those movements and try to progress those. For my second velocity day of the week was the weighted ball pull downs. And so pull downs is my favorite drill to gain velocity. Basically just because it teaches you to be athletic, because you're sprinting toward the target, turning, and then ripping it. And also it just teaches you the intent to throw hard. Like nothing else in the throwing world can teach you the intent to throw hard like a pull down can. And you have to be really athletic to be able to do it. And so those two things are something that is developed by the pull down. So how we did this was, there are a bunch of weighted balls starting from, I would say, like 7 ounce, 6 ounce, 5 ounce, which is the baseball, 4 ounce, and then the 3 ounce. And so you'll grab the leather baseballs for all of them. And then you would, again, like the plyo velo, you would take turns throwing each one, probably 2 to 3 of them, and then track the velocity of each throw. And so when I was at Driveline in 2018, I moved out there in Seattle for a little bit. Pull down days are supposed to be really, really intense. Every one of us had an energy drink and we just got absolutely caffeinated, and we took turns hyping each other up like, let's go. And then we'll sprint to the target, turn, and then let it rip. And then we will just see how hard we can possibly throw the ball, because this is going to be the drill that is going to let you throw the hardest you'll ever throw with a baseball. You have all this linear momentum, and then you're throwing the piss out of the ball. And so another good thing about the pull downs is it develops a lead leg like no other. Sprinting toward the target, so there's all this linear momentum. And then to actually throw the ball with any kind of a velocity, you need to stop all that momentum. Think of like a car, and then it has to crash, and then the throw happens. And so your lead leg has to be really, really strong to be able to throw at a high velocity. And so this is something that developed my lead leg. I would do pull downs once a week, every week for 2 years almost. I did have a deload in there, and for the most part, I would do pull downs 3 weeks out of 4 for most of the months. And so I'm pretty confident that this is something that developed my lead leg. You know, as you start to throw harder, you can get a little bit more advanced with this, where you only do 1-step shuffles or 2-step shuffles to eliminate a little bit of the linear momentum and make it a little bit closer to the pitching delivery. But if you're just starting out, I would just do full-on sprint pull downs, because the athleticism that it teaches, the lead leg block that it teaches is so valuable, and it sets you up. And so I would do these once a week, but I would definitely work up to these. I wouldn't just go out there with no prior experience and start pulling down with the 3-ounce ball, because that is one of the most stressful throws you will ever make in your baseball career. And so I would definitely build up to this with the long toss, do some plyos while you're doing the long toss. And then once you do 1 to 2 months of that, and then you feel pretty prepped, your arm feels pretty good, then I'll start to do pull downs on a regular basis. But definitely don't jump into this one. It's a very stressful one, but very, very beneficial if you can do them right. It depends on how much time you actually have to train. For me, I had like a year and a half where I took off from playing, and so I had a long time to train. I probably trained this way for a full year almost. Plyo velos, pull downs, long toss. If you only have like 6 months, for example, I would do this for like 3 to 4 months, probably 3 months, and then finally get on the mound and learn how to throw hard on the mound. All of these things, the plyo velo, the pull downs, is teaching your body and developing a body that is able to produce 90 plus miles an hour. But now that you develop the body, you develop the muscles and the force to be able to throw that hard, you actually have to get on the mound and learn how to do it. And that's a whole thing where we would have to break down mechanics and stuff like that. That's a whole thing on its own, but if you're throwing under 90 miles an hour, I honestly wouldn't worry about that. I would just focus on this velo stuff, and then once you get on the mound, if you're pulling down 95 plus plyo velos, your gray ball is in the low 90s, then you're probably going to be pretty close to throwing 90 miles an hour, if not above that already. And so I would really focus on those 2 things first, and then get on the mound and then assess. If you're pulling down at like 95 plus and then you're only throwing like 85, then there's probably a huge mechanical breakdown that you are going to have to address. But to start off, I would just train those 2 things and then learn how to throw hard on the mound. All right, step number 4 is lifting with a purpose. And so there are 2 things that I really focused on with the lifting side of things, which was progressive overload and developing speed and power. So firstly, progressive overload. This is basically gradually increasing the weight that you're able to lift. And so, for example, if you start out squatting 135 pounds, then you would add 5 pounds each week and try to gradually increase the amount of weight that you're able to lift. And so when I first started out lifting, I struggled. I don't think I was even able to squat 135 pounds. I struggled to squat 135, but in 2 years, I was squatting over 400 pounds. And this is because of progressive overload. I followed a program. I think for the most part, I followed something pretty close to the 5x5 program, which is basically you do 5 sets of 5 of squat 3 times a week, and then you increase the load every single session that you're able to complete it. Or if you're not able to complete it, then you would just do the same weight and just try to get the 5 sets of 5. And the good news is if you're a newbie, then strength and muscle gains are gonna come really quick, because newbie gains are overpowered. And so it might sound like a big jump from going from 135 to 400 plus pounds, but the road to getting from 135 to 300 should be pretty smooth. You should be able to add weight pretty much every week until you stall, and then you just deload. You deload for 1 week, you decrease a little bit of the weight, and then you build back up. And so it's kind of like this: progressive overload, deload, drop the weight a little bit, start from there, and then beat the previous record. And then it's kind of like that. It's just like a wave where you keep going up. It's not going to be a straight line for sure. And there's going to be like, you might get injured sometimes or something like that. And so for the most part, I would keep it simple, compound movements, squat, trap bar deadlift, bench, pull-ups, rows. I would try to progress those movements. So my favorites were front squats. I didn't really like the back squat because it messed with my back. Trap bar deadlifts, again, it felt safer on my back. And so I like those. Dumbbell bench press, I don't know, people told me that I shouldn't barbell bench press, but now I think it's fine, but I would just do dumbbell bench press. I just like it anyway. I actually like the single arm dumbbell bench press. And so that's what I do now. But for the back pull-ups, weighted pull-ups, I would progress those to get really, really strong, pulling yourself up with the lats and stuff like that. And then rows, I would get really, really strong with those. One arm dumbbell row is my personal favorite. But so I would get these core movements and I would try to progress them every single week and try to do that until I fail, and then I'll deload and then repeat. And so you can add like accessory movements around it. I'm not telling you to do only those exercises, but my biggest thing is I want you to keep it simple. It has to be simple. It can't be overcomplicated. A lot of these lifting, baseball specific programs are like the most complicated thing on this earth. In my last year of Pro Bowls, they were trying to tell me about some like rib cage anatomy and optimal lifting for the rib cage. Like, okay, I get it, but like you do want to keep it simple. And if you're someone who's not even at like professional level, then just stick to the basics. Just stick to the compound movements. Try to progress 5 main lifts and get really, really strong at those. Get really, really elite at those. And so that you can just keep progressing. Like if you get complicated with it and you're not very consistent with it and you can't really like do the exercises properly, you're not going to be progressing very nicely. So if you have 5 main movements, this is all you do, and this is all you track, then you can do the progressive overload. But if you're adding in complicated stuff and then you're not even progressing, and then it just goes like maybe a tiny bit up, but like it's not going to be as good as if you just stuck with basics. And so that's progressive overload. This is really important for gaining muscle. Progressive overload is really important when you're in a caloric surplus because all that calories have to go somewhere. We don't want them to turn into fat. And so progressive overload, lift heavy to turn all of those calories into muscle. So the next thing is developing speed and power. And so this is something that I would do after you can squat. I would say like 350 plus, trap bar deadlift 400 plus, and dumbbell bench at least like 80s. And you can do like 10 pull-ups and you can dumbbell row like hundreds. You need a base level strength before you start working on speed and power. If you're working on speed and power before you have a base level of strength, it's just not going to be as effective. You just need a base level of strength to be able to throw at a high velocity. And if you don't have that strength, then no matter how quick you are, how powerful you are, you're probably not going to throw as hard as you can. And so if you're not very strong, that would be the #1 priority. Get that strength up, and then we can work on getting you really, really quick and powerful and moving you quick. And so there are a couple ways to train this. So how I did it was firstly plyometric training. You probably heard of it before, but I performed a bunch of jumping exercises. So box jumps, broad jumps, high-ins, band assisted jumps. All of that is really good for developing like speed and power, stuff like that. Just learning how to move your body. And again, you can incorporate these as you do the progressive overload. This is something that I would actually recommend, is do 1 set of squats and then go do a set of box jumps. And so that can be your superset. You're developing strength, but you're also developing the speed and power through the plyometric training. It's a little bit of a different story with the next one, which is velocity-based training. Velocity-based training is basically when you take a lighter weight and you move it as quickly as possible. And so an example would be if you have a trap bar and your max trap bar deadlift is, let's just say 500 pounds. It's 500 pounds, but then what you would actually do is put 250 pounds on there and then you would lift it as quickly as possible. And my favorite for this was actually to jump, but that's kind of like another whole thing. But Basically, velocity-based training is to grab a lighter weight and move it as quickly as possible. So this is really, really important to build power for a couple reasons. It improves the speed at which the muscle is able to fire. And so when you train velocity-based training, your muscles are able to fire a little bit quicker, which makes you move quicker on the mound. But as I said before, you do want to build this strength first, because if you're doing velocity-based training with under 100 pounds because you can only deadlift like 225, it's just not going to do much for you. What you want is to be able to deadlift 400 plus pounds, and then you're doing the velocity-based training with like 200 plus pounds, and that's what's actually going to develop the power necessary to throw at a high velocity. When you're doing the velocity-based training, you do want to stay in between 0.75 to 1.3 meters per second on the bar, and this is measured through a bunch of devices, and if you've seen one before, you'd know what I'm talking about. But that's kind of the power zone or the range that you want to stay in, which is best for power development. Velocity-based training is also good for neuromuscular coordination. And so it's just a fancy way of saying the coordination between your brain and your muscle. And so when you're training the velocity-based training, your muscles are able to better fire. Your brain is able to tell your muscles to fire, and it's able to do it better than before. And lastly, like rate of force development. And so when you train velocity-based training, it just develops how quick a muscle can fire. And we already talked about this, which is really, really important for pitching velocity. And so this is the training method that actually got me from 95 miles an hour to 98 miles an hour. And so again, I wouldn't worry about this too much if you're under 90 miles an hour, or even 95 miles an hour. But the way I got from 95 to 98 was previously I was just working on progressive overload and plyometrics. I was just getting really, really strong and then using plyometrics to develop that speed and power. But when I was throwing 95, I was stuck there for like 2 years. And so I knew I had to change something. And what I incorporated was this thing called jump-based velocity-based training. And so what this kind of is the same thing. You have a lighter load and you're moving it as quickly as possible. But what I did was I used a weight that I was barely able to jump with. So for example, trap bar jumps, I would use a weight that I was barely able to get my feet off the ground. Or a belt squat, same thing, barely getting off the ground. And so the biggest thing with velocity-based training is that it has to be at 100% effort level, 1,000% effort level, because your muscles do have to be firing at the quickest that it can. And so the way I made sure this was happening was to make sure that I was grabbing a weight that I could barely jump, and I would try to get my feet off the ground. And so this is what really developed the horsepower that I needed to go from throwing in the mid 90s to getting into the upper 90s. And so a couple exercises that I really like that I'm incorporating for myself right now is the belt squat jumps. So I wouldn't recommend having a barbell on your back just because of the axial load that it places on your spine. I did have back surgery, and I'm pretty sure that the jump squats are what contributed to that. At my peak, I was jump squatting 300 plus pounds jump squats. And so that's no joke, but that's like a lot of power, and it kind of just shows you like power that's needed to throw in the upper 90s. Obviously, there are people who don't have that and have outlier abilities like mobility, stuff like that, and they can throw in the upper 90s. But for me, I didn't have any outlier qualities, so I just had to get there through horsepower, honestly, just power, strength, and stuff like that. So for my favorite exercises right now is, again, the belt squat jumps. When you have a belt, it places less strain on your spine, and so it's a safer exercise. And also leg press jumps. Not the plate loaded ones where it's above you, but the ones that are parallel to you, and you're moving in your seat. And so it's kind of like a swing where you're here and then you jump and then the seat moves and then you can do that. But those are my two favorite exercises right now. I think those are the safest, and that's something that I'm doing right now, even with a history of back issues. And I think it's pretty safe. So those are the two exercises for power development and velocity-based training that I really like. So step number 5 is to take some time off playing. And so for the 2 years that I gained, went from 78 to 95 miles an hour, 90% of that I wasn't playing baseball. It was basically just training. And so the thing that I see these days is that kids are playing a lot. They play all year round and they can never have any time to dedicate to velocity training or training in general. And so because they're always playing and they have to be ready to be playing. And so this is something that completely changed my career, taking some time off to really focus on velocity development. Instead of throwing a bullpen midweek, I'd do a plyo velo day. Instead of throwing 100 pitches on the weekend, I would do a weighted ball pull down day. Instead of going light in the weight room so I'm not sore for the next game or whatever, I'd be progressively overloading. And so I was able to structure my days and my workouts to maximize throwing velocity and not playing time. And so this is kind of what I did. I took some time off. I went dark for a year and a half, and everyone thought I was falling behind. Everyone thought I quit baseball or something like that. What I was actually doing was I was just training on my own. And I actually moved out to Seattle to Driveline, and this is where I made a huge jump, and I came out throwing 88 to 90. And then obviously I trained on my own to get to that 95 mile an hour mark. But that was a big jump when I came back and I was throwing 88, 90. Everyone was like, wow, like he came out of nowhere. We thought you would quit or something. I was like, yep, I was just focused on training at the time. And this is something that I think can be really, really beneficial to a lot of players, because playing will make you better at playing baseball, but it's not very good for velocity development. Something that I was told when I was young was that velocity will come as you age. You don't have to train for it. And this is something that I reject. It's definitely not true. You can't just wait for your velocity to come as you age. Unless you're some freak athlete who has outlier qualities, then the velocity is never going to come. Throwing 95 plus isn't just something that you develop into. You have to train yourself. You have to train your body, your mind, and your muscle to be able to get there. And so if you're watching this, I think the question would be like, are you where you need to be? And do you have a pretty good plan on getting to where you want to be? Because if not, then it might be beneficial for you to take some time off, if you do have that time, to really focus on training and becoming good enough and increasing some velo, because velo is a number one sought after metric. And then you can come out and go compete and get good at baseball and stuff like that. But for the people who aren't like outlier athletes, freak athletes, I think this is the way, is to really just take some time off playing, really focus on velocity development, build the engine first, and then you can go learn about pitch design and command and everything else. But you really have to build that engine first. And engine is the most important thing, especially as an amateur or a college athlete, because that's what the scouts look for. That's what the recruiters look for. And so if you're throwing 94 miles an hour, you're going to get way more interest than if you're throwing 84 miles an hour with a perfect command. It's just, it is what it is. And so that is the last step, is to take some time off to play and then focus on all of these other steps that we just talked about. And yeah, that's the complete step-by-step of how I went from 78 to 95 miles an hour in 2 years.